Our story began deep within a forest glade next to a moonlit lake where a human man and an elvish woman would meet in secret to share their forbidden love. One night, under the light of a full moon, their love would conceive a child. But, unbeknownst to the couple, this was no chance occurrence. Their child had been chosen by the lunar goddess, Artemis herself, to one day fulfill a prophecy that would change the world around them for all eternity. On a cold winter's eve, a halfling was born to the human man and the elvish woman, a girl whom they gave the name of Nessa. Her birth meant that the forbidden relationship between her parents was now made public, and neither occurrence was easily accepted by their elders nor the community. As the years passed and the halfling matured in intelligence and strength, she came to realize the burden that her bloodline had placed upon her. Half-breeds were seen as tainted and cursed, and despite her best efforts, she held no place of respect or stature among her human counterparts. Judged, bullied, and driven to a sense of loneliness, Nessa instead found solace amongst the animals of the forest. Every night, animals of all kinds would gather around the lake to drink their fill, and the halfling would sit and speak with each of them. An oddity, to be sure, but she was able to communicate with the world around her in a way that neither human nor elvish kind could. She could feel the forest and everything within it. The animals listened to her secrets, her hopes and sadness. They listened without the judgments of society, and each offered comfort in their own way. Time went on, and Nessa had now grown into a beautiful and skilled young halfling maiden. Since the loss of her father and the resulting sickness of her mother, she had grown so accustomed to the coldness of the community around her that she was caught off guard when she attracted the attention of a human man in her village. Nessa knew nothing about him, only that he was a fresh face to her village. She held no trust for humans, and refused to let her heart soften towards them. But there was something about him that kept her intrigued, entranced, ignorant of the danger she was putting herself in. The man would gain her trust over time with sweet sentiments of the love that they shared and the adventures that they were destined to have. The connection would grow as he learned of her forest sanctuary, and, to her elation, he confessed his own love for the lake and the animals of the forest, requesting to visit them together. Blinded by the bliss of her first love, Nessa only saw his intentions as good, and did as he asked. Under the light of the full moon, she made her way into the forest and waited for him, in the very same glade her parents had once shared their own moment of forbidden affection. As she waited for him, the hours grew longer and the night turned cold, but her human love never appeared. The animals came to be by her side, to offer warmth and comfort as they always did, but even their company could not ease her anxiety, her disappointment. Having felt the pain of a truly broken heart for the first time, Nessa knelt next to the lake and began to weep. She cried to the moon, demanding to know if she was destined to be alone. Suddenly, a noise in the forest spooked the animals, and they scattered. As her tears fell into the lake and blurred her illuminated reflection, another came into focus behind her. It was him, finally. Her heart skipped a beat, but as she turned to him, she barely recognized his face. His features were twisted and contorted in hatred, and just as she began to call out his name, he lunged at her, grabbing her by her throat and forcing them both back into the shallows of the freezing water. Nessa struggled and fought him, clawing at his arms, clawing at his chest, trying to scream out for help, but to no avail. She stared pleadingly into his eyes, but all she saw was anger, and as her eyes darted around, looking for something, anything to help her, she instead found something that horrified her. A sigil was branded into his chest, now made visible through his torn garments. The sigil was one she recognized, the crest of a renowned family of powerful half-breed hunters, and the immediate realization hit her that it had all been a lie. The love between them was nothing but a falsehood brought into existence, a trap set by a hunter to secure his prize without risk or reprimand. The village had frowned upon Nessa and her family for so many years. Would her disappearance not be a welcome one? Would her mother not just presume that she had eloped with her human love to escape a similar life of judgment? The human followed her horrified gaze down to the scar on his chest, and a maniacal smile began to form across his face. He grinned and tightened his grip around her throat, and though she fought him as hard as her limbs would allow, she could feel his weight slowly pushing her down until the waters of the lake were lapping at her waist, washing over her chest, and finally rising up over her face. Nessa began to choke and gasp for oxygen that simply did not exist. Instead, her lungs were filling quickly with icy water. She tried one last time to fight him, with limbs that were now too frozen to move, and the searing pain throughout her body was overwhelming. As the black water enveloped her, she felt the human's grip on her neck loosen, forcing her to inhale the cold liquid. All she could hear was the loud thumping of her heart, and the rhythm was slowing down. Her world was quickly fading, and her last thoughts were ones of sorrow. Not for her death, however, but sorrow for the lake and the animals, all of which would become sickened and infected by her drowned body. The sanctuary, her safe place, the human had brought a curse upon it, and for that, the pain of dying was pale in comparison to the agony of betrayal that he had set alight within her. Then there was darkness. The pressure was no longer surrounding her, and there was no longer any pain. But, in fact, there was no longer anything, anywhere. All she could see was nothingness surrounding her, and she could feel it too, the vast emptiness. But there was something else within the void, a powerful feminine presence, like nothing she had ever encountered before. Suddenly, she heard a clear, ethereal voice in her mind. "Finally, you are here. I have waited a long time for you, Nessa. She knew not who the voice belonged to, but as she tried to speak, to question what was happening, nothing came out. Instead, the voice spoke again. Do not question me. Simply feel my light and my love for you. I am Artemis, deity of the moon and of nature, and guardian of those who need my protection. She recognized the name, of course. Her mother had raised her to pay respects to the many gods and goddesses of the astral plane, but at this moment she knew not how to respond, so she simply listened as the deity spoke once more. Every day I bear witness to the slow destruction of the earth at the selfish hands of unworthy souls. The flora and fauna have been poisoned, the natural order disrupted. However, I also bear witness to moments of compassion and healing at the hands of true souls such as yourself. And this gives me great faith that things can be brought back into balance once again. A light appeared in front of Nessa, small at first and pulsing softly. With every pulse, the light grew ever larger until it drowned out the darkness around her, and she was reminded of the heartbeat that she would never hear, never feel, ever again. Do not feel sadness. Know that your physical body was a necessary sacrifice in order to access the blessing I bestowed within you at the moment of your creation. Your soul has always been destined for a greater role, and now you are no longer limited within the bindings of your previous physical vessel. This information should have upset her, but instead, Nessa felt a strange sense of comfort, as if what she was hearing now was actually a simple truth she had refused to acknowledge all along. She wondered what blessing the goddess meant, and her curiosity was answered almost immediately. The gift I bestowed upon your soul meant that one day a time would come that would allow you to act as my conduit in the mortal realms. You will not exist as you once did. Instead, you will consume the energy of unworthy souls in my honor, and in exchange, the energy will feed the health of the world that it has so affected. Water may have claimed you, but as such, water will now be yours to travel through under my protection. Destiny has brought you to this moment, and so now I ask of you, Nessa, will you accept this blessing willingly? As the humans sat on the bank of the lake, watching the waters settle and the surface become still, he panted and grunted in anger and achievement. His breathing began to stagger as he noticed an illumination growing from the depths, becoming larger as it raced towards the shore. Intrigued, he rose to his feet and walked closer to the shallows, as the glow quickly broke the surface of the lake in clashing swirls of gold and purple, and manifested into the form of a figure. His curiosity soon turned to horror, however, as the sudden recognition of the figure hit him. He fell backwards onto the bank, scrambling to retreat as he watched the same halfling he had just placed in a watery tomb, now striding confidently towards him. But Nessa was not the same weak halfling that she had once believed herself to be. Not anymore. A transformation and renewal of her soul had taken place, and her weakness had now been replaced with immense power. A dark pair of curved horns were growing and protruding from her temples, framing her angular face and striking features. Her long raven hair was becoming void of colour, washing out to a bright silver with reflections of purple, illuminated by the moonlight. Her deep siren eyes, once emerald green, now blazed bright like the embers of a fire, and a large purple gemstone was set deep into the soft notch of flesh between her throat and her collarbones. The crystal pulsated with energy, and as it did, ethereal golden armor began to manifest from within it, growing across her chest and down her slender figure. She gracefully sauntered towards the human as he sat trembling before her, her fangs glistening as the grin on her face betrayed her intentions. She gently trailed her darkened claws up his chest, and as they entwined around his throat, she met his gaze with a ferocious glare. The human's eyes began to bulge as his staggered breathing slowly became more desperate. But every time he choked, it wasn't his oxygen Nessa was claiming. It was the very essence of his soul. Curling tendrils of energy danced upwards from his mouth and nose, and his body twitched violently. He tried to escape her grasp, but she showed him the same mercy he had shown her, and continued to inhale his life force. As the animals of the forest glade began to emerge from the safety of the brush, she finally released her grip around the human's throat and allowed his frail and lifeless body to sink backwards to the ground. As she stood up and revelled in the satisfaction of revenge, it felt as if the energy she had just claimed was swirling within her very veins. Nessa closed her eyes and held out her hands, concentrating on drawing out the energy. As purple orbs of swirling light slowly began to manifest from her palms, the very air around her seemed to illuminate, and as she opened her eyes once more, she witnessed the world around her changing. The water of the lake becoming clearer, sparkling under the shine of the full moon. The fresh injuries sustained by the animals of the forest healing of their own accord. The air becoming less toxic to breathe, the trees extending their roots into the soil, the very cells of the environment around her becoming stronger and healthier. She could feel everything, just as she once had, and it filled her soul with happiness. Once again, surrounded by the animals she held so dear, Nessa gazed out across that fateful lake and felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For even though her previous existence had been taken from her, her new existence had now brought her somewhere even better. A place in the world where she finally felt like she belonged.